She was a second-year student, Gaelic track, a round-faced girl with ink-stained fingers who had once lent Robin her notes on old Irish declensions. She carried a thick book under one arm and a small oil lamp in her other hand. The lamp threw shifting shadows across the stonework. "Robin?" she blinked. "What are you doing here so late?" 140 seconds. Couldn't sleep, he said. His voice sounded thin to his own ears. Thought I'd take a walk. In the tower. She tilted her head. The library's closed. I just checked. 120. I wasn't going to the library. I like the quiet at night. He tried to smile. It felt stiff. What about you? Kathy held up the book. Left my Pliny in the lecture room this afternoon. Idiotic. I need it for tomorrow's composition. She glanced over his shoulder toward the back door. Were you going out? You're soaked. 100. I came in from the rain a few minutes ago, was just about to head back. He gestured toward the stairwell that led up toward the residential floors. I'll walk with you if you like. 80 seconds. The 40 remaining would be tight, but she was already nodding, and the last thing he could afford was to let her linger here when the operatives came down. He stepped away from the door and toward the stairs, forcing himself not to look back. 70 seconds. Did you hear about the lecture series next term? Kathy asked, falling into step beside him. Playfair is bringing in a fellow from Göttingen to talk about comparative syntax. I thought you'd be interested. 60. 50. I hadn't heard. He matched her pace, not too fast, not too slow, and tried to keep his shoulders relaxed. That does sound interesting. 40 seconds. They reached the first landing. The stairs curved to the right, and as they turned, Robin heard a sound from below, the soft scrape of a foot on stone. Then a second, barely audible over the rain. The operatives. They were coming down right now, through the vestibule, past the door he had left standing open. If Kathy turned around, if she heard a door close too sharply, 30 seconds. I think I left my notebook in the common room, Robin said abruptly. Stupid. I'd better go back for it now, or he'll have nothing to write with tomorrow. Kathy gave him a puzzled look. At this hour? 5 minutes. I know exactly where I put it. He already had one hand on the banister, turning himself back down the stairs. Good night, Kathy. Good luck with the Pliny. Good night, Robin. She sounded uncertain, but she kept climbing. 20 seconds. Robin descended as fast as he could without running. He reached the vestibule floor just as a dark shape slipped out through the back door. The second operative followed a moment later, pulling the door closed behind them with a barely audible click. Robin stopped in the middle of the empty vestibule and let his breath out. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He had walked away from Kathy with a calm expression and an invented story about a notebook, and behind his back 2 agents of Hermes had crossed the threshold carrying stolen silver, and nobody had seen anything, and he had sounded normal, or normal enough, and the rain was still falling, and the door was closed, and the tower was quiet. He leaned against the wall just for a moment, and then he walked upstairs to his room. The double life. After that night, Robin waited for someone to knock on his door. He waited for the police, for Lovell, for the poker, and the threat of being sent back to Canton. But nothing happened. The tower stood intact the next morning. No one mentioned a theft. Life at Oxford rolled forward as if the night had never happened. Griffin sent him a short note. Wait for word. And Robin waited. While he waited, he threw himself into university life with an intensity that surprised even Ramy. They studied together in the Bodleian until closing. They argued about translation in the college gardens. Letty dragged them to lectures and concerts. Victoire, who had been reserved at first, began to join the conversations with a sharp sarcasm that reminded Robin of Ramy. The 4 of them became a tight group. They ate together, studied together, and defended each other against the sneers of other students. Philip Wright, a smug blonde classicist, once remarked that the new Babel cohort was a desperate attempt to make up for the lack of real English scholars. Ramy answered that the lack was Wright's own, and that his Latin was so poor even the silver match pairs couldn't fix his syntax. Robin laughed, and in the act of laughing, he felt a stab of guilt. He loved these friends. He would have killed for any of them, and at the same time, he was betraying them every night he kept silent about what he was doing, what he was. Griffin reached him again after a month with a new code in a new hiding place. Then again, Robin helped with 3 thefts, 4, 7. Always the same routine. Open the door, wait 5 minutes, close the door. After the 7th, Griffin met him on a bench in Christchurch Meadow. It was cold, and Griffin's coat was so thin he was shivering. "You've improved," Griffin said. "Your pulse doesn't race anymore." It was true. Robin no longer felt fear when he pushed the door open. What he felt was an addictive kind of vertigo, the certainty of doing something dangerous and meaningful. But he also felt a growing fracture inside himself, a split between the student who laughed with Ramy in the library and the accomplice who stole from the tower at night. The dormouse metaphor. Late in the term, Griffin summoned him again to the meadow. The frost had hardened the grass, and Griffin's breath came in white bursts. He looked thinner than the last time, more hollowed out, but his eyes carried the same fierce energy. "I want you to understand where you are," he said. "Do you know how the Romans fattened dormice?" Robin let out a breath. "Griffin, your professors made you read Varro, didn't they?" He describes a glorarium. It's an elegant piece of equipment. You make a clay jar with holes for air. The inner walls are smooth as glass, impossible to climb. You drop in food through the holes and make sure there are a few ledges and pathways so the dormouse doesn't get too bored. And you keep it dark, always dark, so the creature believes it's always time to hibernate. All it does is sleep and grow fat. "I get the idea," Robin said. "Babel is a glorarium. It gives you privileges, status, a monthly allowance, robes, books, wine. It makes you feel special. It persuades you that you're one of the chosen. But the door is locked, Robin. And the one who feeds you is the same one who will slaughter you once you're fat enough." Robin knew it was true. Every morning when he woke in his room overlooking the courtyard, every month when he received his 20 shillings, every evening when he sat at the dining hall with his friends, he felt the warmth of the jar. And he hated himself for enjoying it. Not long after, he saw a student from another college, a boy named Bill Jameson, standing outside a pawnbroker's on the high street, a pocket watch dangling from his fingers, his face tight with something Robin recognized as desperation. Jameson was pawning things to pay his tuition. Meanwhile, Babel covered every expense for its translators, books, materials, robes, wine tastings. Robin walked past the pawnbroker's window without stopping, and the image of Jameson's fingers on that watch chain stayed with him for days. The inequality was grotesque, and he was on the comfortable side of it. "I can't give this up," he confessed to Griffin the next time they met. "I can't walk away from Oxford." "I'm not asking you to walk away," Griffin said. "I'm asking you not to forget what you are. Enjoy the jar all you want, but when the time comes to break it, you have to be ready." "And when is that?" Griffin didn't answer. He just looked toward the Tower of Babel, which stood against the gray sky like a silver needle. "When the empire runs out of silver," he said at last. The temptation of the elite. One autumn morning, Robin found an invitation card under his door. The embossed letterhead read, "Elton Pendennis requests the pleasure of your company at a wine tasting." Pendennis was one of the most influential aristocrats at Oxford, a young man of noble family who organized exclusive evenings for select students. Ramy and Letty warned him not to go. "That man wants a Chinese pet," Ramy said. "You'll be his exotic entertainment for the evening." "I'm not a pet," Robin answered. "It's an opportunity. If I want to be taken seriously in this country, I need people like Pendennis to respect me." Letty flushed crimson. She was near tears. "You don't need his respect," she said. "You have us." But Robin had already decided. He bought a bottle of port and presented himself at Pendennis' rooms that same night. The evening was exactly as Ramy had predicted. Pendennis and his friends greeted him with condescending courtesy. They asked whether he was Chinese, whether he liked opium, whether he had read Coleridge's Kubla Khan. Welcome, one of the guests, quoted some mangled lines as proof of his knowledge of Oriental culture. Robin endured them with a tight smile, until Pendennis dismissed poetic translation as mere copywork, the labor of untalented craftsmen. That was when Robin spoke. "Translation," he said, "is harder than poetry. The poet can choose any word, any image. The translator dances in chains. He has to find, inside a foreign language, a way to convey what the original says without betraying its music, its rhythm, its soul. That isn't craftsmanship, it's art." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Pendennis looked at him with renewed interest. "You speak as if you cared," he said. "I do," Robin answered. "I'm Chinese, after all." he stood up and walked out. Back at his corridor, he found Victoire waiting. Without preamble, she told him Letty's story. Letty's brother, Lincoln, the family favorite, had died 4 years before, crushed under a cart. The night before it happened, Letty had told him she wished he were dead, and then her wish had come true. Since that night, Letty had been carrying a guilt she never confessed to anyone. Her relentless drive to fit in, to be taken seriously, to force everyone's friendship, it was how she tried to undo a sentence she could never unsay. Robin felt a hot rush of shame. He had judged Letty harshly, without knowing her history, and as the shame receded, another thought surfaced, colder and closer. He was keeping a secret from Letty at least as heavy as the one she carried, and, unlike her, he was choosing to keep it, actively, every night he opened the tower door. He was the one she trusted, and he was the one who could break that trust with a single confession. All four of them carried wounds the others couldn't see. That was the real jar, not Babel, but the silence that kept them apart even when they were together. The year of study and the daguerreotype. The first year ended, and the four scattered for their summer language immersions. Robin stayed in England, studying Sanskrit with Professor Chakravarti. When they returned for the second year, something in the group had shifted. They were steadier, more certain, more aware of who they were and what they wanted. The silver engraving seminar with Playfair was a revelation. They learned the fundamental principles: untranslatability, etymological chaining, the limits of fluency, and the durability of the bars. Playfair showed them the triacle bar, the exact one that had saved Robin in Canton, and told them it had been invented by a former student named Evie Brooke. The finest engraver Babel ever produced, Playfair said. She vanished some years ago. Robin asked what had happened to her, but Playfair changed the subject. The climax of the seminar was the demonstration of the forbidden match pair. Playfair engraved the word translation on a silver bar, pairing it with its supposed equivalent in another language. The bar began to vibrate with terrifying force, and Playfair threw it to the floor seconds before it cracked and disintegrated. Perfect translation is impossible, he said. Attempting it doesn't just break the bar, it breaks all the silver around it, and if someone attempted it at scale, the damage would be contagious. Robin thought of Griffin. He thought of what a weapon capable of disintegrating all of Babel's silver would mean, and he held his tongue. Then came Lovell's etymology lecture. To Robin's surprise, his father was a brilliant teacher. He traced how the word typhoon had traveled from Chinese to Portuguese, from Portuguese to English, transforming at every leap. He showed that English was a language built on borrowings, plunder, invasions, an imperial language, and yet a living one, changeable, impossible to contain. Words are not fixed, Lovell said. They are fluid sets of symbols that reflect social transformations. To control language is to control thought. That is why the empire needs translators, and that is why we matter. Robin felt a mix of admiration and disgust. Lovell was a magnificent professor and a terrible father. He had taught Robin to love words while denying him love. He was the glirarium made flesh. The year crested with the arrival of the daguerreotype. Anthony Ribbon, the graduate who had welcomed them on their first day, won the competition to solve Daguerre's camera problem using a Latin match pair, imago, which meant both likeness and specter. The patent was a success, and Babel claimed another triumph. Letty insisted the four of them have their portrait taken together. They posed stiffly with forced smiles for what felt like an eternity. The next day, when they collected the develop plate, Ramy hated it. Victoire said it looked nothing like them. Letty hung it on her mantelpiece. Robin studied the image and felt a pang that was hard to name. The photograph had captured their faces but erased something he couldn't point to: the warmth of Ramy's laughter, the particular way Victoire's expression softened when she was thinking, the guarded hope Letty carried behind her eyes. The picture was a translation, and, like any translation, it had lost something essential in the process. It showed four friends who had never stolen silver, never hidden secrets, never betrayed each other with their silence. A fantasy, and fantasies didn't last. The silver flow. 2 days after the portrait was taken, Robin found a strip of cloth tied to the birch tree at Merton College, a signal he hadn't seen in months. The knot was tight and the fabric was dry, which meant it had been left recently. The Hermes thread, which had slackened during the long stretch of lectures and social maneuvering, pulled taut again in an instant. The next afternoon, he met Griffin on Port Meadow. The winter wind was up, and the tall grass bent in waves. Griffin walked with his head down, his hands buried in the pockets of his threadbare coat. "I want you to understand something," Griffin said. "The British Empire is an extraction machine. It extracts silver from mines, it extracts resources from colonies, it extracts labor from slaves, and it extracts words from the languages it conquers. Babel is the engine of that machine. Without translators, without silver bars, the empire stops." "I know that," Robin said. "No, you don't. You know the theory, but you haven't seen what I've seen. You haven't stood in the opium fields of Bengal, where they grow the drug they'll force into China at gunpoint. You haven't seen the slave ships leaving Liverpool with silver bars engraved to keep captives docile during the crossing. You haven't watched children work 15-hour shifts in Manchester factories, their lungs full of silver dust, so that rich men in London can ride in carriages that drive themselves." He stopped and turned to face Robin. His face was gaunt, and for a moment Robin saw not the revolutionary leader, but the frightened boy Lovell had thrown away years before. "This isn't a game," Griffin said. "It's not a university adventure. It's a war. And in a war, people die." Robin nodded, unsure what to say. Griffin placed a hand on his shoulder, an awkward gesture that looked rehearsed. "We have a plan," he said. "A plan to end all of this. But I need you to trust me. I need you to do things you won't understand. Things that will seem absurd or dangerous. Without asking questions. Can you do that?" Robin thought of Ramy, of Victoire, of Letty, of the Tower of Babel, white and shining against the Oxford sky. He thought of his mother, dead on a straw mat while Lovell drank wine in Macau. He thought of the Chinese laborer he had lied to on the Canton dock 10 years before, and of the shame that still burned in his throat when he remembered it. Griffin told him then about the flow of silver. "The world's silver runs like a river, from the Andean mines to Spain, from Spain to England, from England to China. China buys no British goods. It accepts only silver in exchange for tea and silk. That means every year tons of British silver vanish into the Chinese sink. Sooner or later, the empire will drain its reserves and its power will collapse." "Hermes isn't causing that collapse," Griffin said. "We're only speeding it up." Robin listened to the theory and didn't know whether to believe it. It was too elegant, too complete, but deep down, he wanted it to be true. He wanted there to be a force that could bring down the tower, crack the jar, free him from the glorarium. "Yes," he said, "I can do it." Griffin nodded and started walking again. Robin followed, feeling the weight of an invisible silver bar pressing into his conscience. He had crossed a line, and there was no way back. Episode 3. Griffin expone su filosofia revolucionaria y confia plenamente en Robin to Lovell revela. The winter wind cut across Port Meadow, flattening the tall grass into silver waves. Griffin walked with his shoulders hunched, his thin coat flapping, and Robin followed half a step behind, watching the back of a brother who looked exactly like him and felt nothing like him at all. Griffin had been talking for 20 minutes, not the grand revolutionary rhetoric of their first meeting, but something harder, flatter, a theory built from numbers and blood. "The wealth in Britain depends on coercive extraction," Griffin said, not turning around. "As Britain grows, only two things can happen. Either its mechanisms of coercion become much more violent, or the whole structure collapses. The first is more likely, but the first might trigger the second." "You're talking about a very unequal war," Robin said. "You against an empire. Only if you think the empire is inevitable." Griffin stopped and faced him. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. "It isn't. Look at this moment. We're at the tail end of a massive Atlantic crisis. The monarchical empires fell one after another. Britain and France lost America, fought each other, gained nothing. Now we're watching a new consolidation of power, and everyone thinks it's permanent." They thought Rome was permanent too. Robin had heard versions of this argument before in pamphlets, in the radical newspapers that circulated through Oxford's back rooms. But coming from Griffin's cracked lips, it sounded different, less like philosophy, more like a weather forecast. "The 1833 Abolition Act," Griffin continued. "You know why it passed? Not morality, not Wilberforce's speeches. It passed because the slave revolts in Barbados and Jamaica made the plantations unprofitable. The losses became unsustainable. That's how empires change. Not through persuasion, through pressure at the inflection point." Robin felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too soft a word. Something closer to vertigo, the sensation of standing at the edge of a very high place and realizing the ground beneath you was not as solid as you'd believed. You really think you can change history? Robin said. You really believe that? Griffin looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were Lovell's eyes, gray, cold, calculating, but behind the calculation there was something raw, something that had been burned down to its last ember and refused to go out. I have to believe it, Griffin said. There's no other option. They walked in silence back toward the city. The spires of Oxford rose in the distance, pale against the gray sky, and Robin felt the familiar tug, the beauty of the place, the warmth of his rooms, the laughter of Ramy and Victoire and Letty waiting for him in the Magpie Lane common room. The glorarium. I've been thinking, Griffin said, his tone shifting. You've proven yourself. 7 heists, no mistakes, Kathy O'Neill notwithstanding. I've decided you're not going to betray us. Thank you for the vote of confidence. It's not confidence, it's observation. Griffin reached into his coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Here, it's Christmas. Robin unwrapped it slowly. 3 volumes, new bound in dark cloth. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. The title page bore the year 1838. It's about an orphan, Griffin said. I thought you'd find it instructive. Robin opened the first volume. The pages smelled of ink and fresh glue. He thought of the last book Griffin had given him, a note in cipher, instructions for a heist. This was different. This was a gift. Thank you, Robin said. Griffin nodded, already looking away. There will be more work, simpler things for now, fetching books from the Bodleian, copying certain records from the registry, small silver transfers that don't require breaking into the tower. I'll leave instructions in the usual way. Griffin Robin hesitated. When do I get to know more? Where the silver goes? Who the operatives are? What the larger plan is? Patience. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Griffin's voice hardened. You're useful, Robin. Don't push for more than useful. The old anger flickered in Robin's chest, but he swallowed it. He had learned, in the months since meeting his brother, that Griffin's walls were not decorative, they were structural. Push too hard and the whole edifice would close against you. Vigila tu ventana, Griffin said. Watch your window, and then he was walking away, his thin coat swallowed by the darkening afternoon. Double life. The impossibility of bringing Griffin into his Oxford life became clear to Robin the following week, when he almost asked Ramy to dinner at the Twisted Root. They were walking back from the Bodleian, their arms full of books, the winter sun already setting behind the Radcliffe camera. Ramy was complaining about a commentary on Kalidasa that had been written by a German who had never set foot in India. And Robin was laughing, and the whole moment was so warm, so ordinary, so belonging that he thought, I should introduce him to Griffin. They would like each other. Griffin needs someone to argue with who can keep up. Then he remembered. Griffin was dead. Officially, legally, publicly dead. Babel believed he had perished 5 years ago. If Ramy ever saw his face, the face identical to Robin's, but older, harder, there would be no explanation that did not destroy everything. So Robin said nothing. He laughed at Ramy's joke, and they went to the common room, and Letty made tea, and Victoire read aloud from a French newspaper, and Griffin remained invisible, a ghost occupying the same body as his brother, never to be acknowledged in sunlight. The first day of the new term broke that fragile peace. Robin arrived at Babel's main entrance to find it blocked by 4 armed policemen. A crowd of students milled about, whispering, Lalsa. Through gaps in the press of bodies, Robin could see something on the cobblestones, a dark smear, still wet. What happened? Ramy asked, pushing through to where Victoire and Letty stood. Someone tried to break in, Victoire said. Her face was pale. The shields they fired, real bullets. There's blood everywhere. Anthony Ribbon appeared at the top of the steps, his face grim. He called for order and addressed the crowd in his measured, diplomatic voice. The security mechanisms have been upgraded. Any unauthorized entry will be met with lethal force. I advise all students to remain within their colleges after dark and to avoid approaching the tower outside sanctioned hours. The crowd dispersed slowly, students casting nervous glances at the blood-stained cobblestones. Robin stood frozen. He thought of the back door, the midnight hours, the countless times he had opened that door for Hermes operatives. How often do they update the shields? Ramy asked Anthony. Every 2 months, Anthony replied. Professor Playfair has been refining the detection parameters. The old wards only repelled. The new ones, he gestured at the blood, they escalate. Robin felt the scar on his arm, still healing from his last near discovery. The bullets were real now. The next time he opened that door, someone might not walk away. First, the language of loss. Griffin summoned him 3 nights later. A note appeared at Robin's window, written in the familiar phonetic cipher that only someone who spoke both Chinese and English could decode. It directed him to a pub on the far side of the Chairwell, a working man's establishment where no Oxford student would ever set foot. Griffin was already there, hunched in a corner booth, 2 empty glasses before him and a third half full. Sit, he said. Robin sat. The shields have been upgraded. Real bullets. Someone was killed last week. I know. Griffin's voice was flat. That's why I called you. We need to accelerate. There's a shipment coming in next month, 20 bars of high-grade silver, freshly engraved, bound for the Liverpool docks. We need them before they reach the slave ships. You want me to open the door again? I want you to do more than open the door. Griffin leaned forward. I need you inside. The new shields recognize Intention Playfair's latest innovation. They can tell the difference between a student retrieving a forgotten book and a student aiding a theft, but they can't distinguish between a student and the person walking beside him. You'll guide 2 operatives through the upper floors. They'll handle the extraction. You just need to be their shadow. Robin's throat tightened. And if the shields detect us anyway? They won't. I've studied the parameters. The detection field activates based on the purpose of the entry, not the identity of the entrant. As long as you're leading, the shields read your purpose. Your purpose is to be there. And what's my purpose? Griffin's smile was cold. Whatever you tell yourself it is. Robin looked at his brother, the hollow cheeks, the bandaged forearm visible beneath his frayed sleeve, the tremor in his hand as he lifted his glass. Something was wrong, something beyond the usual exhaustion of a fugitive's life. What happened to your arm? Nothing. Griffin, I said it's nothing. Griffin drained his glass and set it down hard. The pub noise filled the silence between them. Then, unexpectedly, Griffin's shoulders sagged. I can't use the silver anymore, not reliably. What do you mean? I mean I've forgotten. The words came out like broken glass. I was 6 years old when Lovell took me from Canton. 6. I spoke Cantonese to my mother, Mandarin to my tutors. By the time I was 12, I'd stopped dreaming in either. Lovell trained me in proper Mandarin, Beijing dialect, the kind the Qing court uses, but he never let me speak Cantonese again. Said it was a peasant tongue. Said it would corrupt my accent. He paused, staring into his empty glass. I can still read it. I can still understand it when I hear it. But I can't speak it, not the way the silver needs. The bars require fluency in the flesh, not fluency on the page. My tongue doesn't remember the shapes anymore. Every time I try to activate a bar, it flickers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I can't risk a mission on sometimes. Robin absorbed this in silence. He thought of his own Mandarin, painstakingly preserved through years of deliberate practice, the weekly sessions with Lovell that had felt like punishment and now revealed themselves as something else entirely. Lovell had trained Robin to be what Griffin could no longer be, a living key to the silver. That's why you need me, Robin said. That's why I need you. Griffin's eyes met his, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no defiance in them. Only exhaustion. You're the only one who can do this, Robin. The only one who speaks it like a native, who can walk into the tower without raising suspicion, who has the training. I built this network, I planned the operations, but I can't execute them, not anymore. The dependence that lay between them shifted, taking on weight and texture. Robin had always thought of himself as the recruit, the novice, the follower. Now he saw that Griffin needed him in ways he hadn't fully understood. It wasn't just Robin's access to the tower. It was his tongue, his childhood, his unbroken connection to the language of their shared origin. How many more operations? Robin asked. As many as it takes. The shot. The night of the heist arrived cold and wet, rain sluicing through the Oxford streets. Robin waited until the Magpie Lane house fell silent, then slipped out his window and crossed the garden to Babel's back entrance. 2 figures waited in the shadows. Griffin's operatives, a man and a woman, both hooded, both silent. Robin recognized neither of them. The shipment is in the 8th floor workshop, Robin whispered. 20 bars freshly engraved in the locked cabinet by the eastern window. I've memorized the combination from Playfair's ledger. The woman nodded. The man produced a pair of thin metal tools. They slipped inside. The tower was dark, its corridors familiar to Robin in the way of places walked 100 times. He led them up the servants' stairs, narrower, less frequented, less likely to have been upgraded with the new detection fields. The 8th floor smelled of silver dust and hot metal, the residue of the day's engraving work. The cabinet was exactly where Robin had seen it in Playfair's records. The woman worked the lock with practiced speed, and within 30 seconds, the cabinet swung open. 20 silver bars gleamed in the faint light from the window. They were halfway down the stairs when the alarm sounded. Not a bell, something worse. A deep hum that vibrated through the walls, through Robin's bones, through his teeth. The silver bars in the operative's bag began to glow with an eerie blue light. "Run," Robin said. They ran. The back door was 30 feet away. 20, 10. Robin's hand was on the handle when the air beside his head split open and something hot punched through his left arm. He didn't scream. The shock was too immediate, too overwhelming. His arm went numb, then exploded into pain. He staggered through the door, the operatives vanishing into the rain ahead of him, and collapsed against the wet stone of the tower wall. Blood, soaking through his sleeve, running down his fingers, pooling on the cobblestones. He clamped his right hand over the wound and pressed, the pressure sending fresh waves of agony through his shoulder. Footsteps. A lantern. Who's there? Professor Playfair's voice, sharp and alarmed. Robin's. Mind raced. He was bleeding. The silver was gone. The alarm was still humming, and Playfair was 10 feet away, approaching fast. Swift? Robin Swift. Is that you? Robin forced himself upright. The world swayed. Professor, there were you hurt. Playfair reached him, lantern raised. His face, usually mild and scholarly, was hard with suspicion. What are you doing here at this hour? I heard the alarm. I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk. Robin's voice came out strained, but the pain in his arm made the strain convincing. I saw people running. They had silver. I tried to stop them and Playfair's eyes dropped to the blood. You were shot. I think so. It's a miracle the ward didn't misidentify you and finish the job. Those shields are tricky things. Well, need to replace them, I think. Playfair pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it against Robin's arm. Can you walk? Yes. Come inside. Well, get you to the infirmary. No, the word came out too fast. No, I'd rather go back to my rooms. It's not as bad as it looks. Playfair studied him for a long moment. The lantern light flickered in the rain. Robin could feel his pulse hammering, could feel the lie stretching thin between them. Very well, Playfair said at last, but you should see a doctor in the morning. And Swift, if you remember anything about the intruders, anything at all, you'll report it immediately. Of course, Professor. Robin walked away through the rain, his hand still clamped over the wound, his sleeve dark with blood. He didn't look back. He didn't stop walking until he reached his room, locked the door behind him, and collapsed onto the floor. The stitch. He couldn't do it. He kept bringing the needle to the wound and then pulling it away, anticipating the pain. The brandy bottle was half empty, and his hands were still shaking. He took 3 more swallows, gagged on the burn, and tried again. The needle pierced skin. The thread pulled through. The pain was so bright and so specific that for a moment he couldn't see. He bit down on the cloth stuffed in his mouth and kept sewing. 4 stitches. 5. 6. The wound closed slowly, messily, a jagged seam that would scar. He tied off the thread, cut it with his pocket knife, and examined his work. It would hold. It would have to. He finished the rest of the brandy, lay back on the floor, and waited for Griffin to contact him. No note came that night, or the next, or the night after that. Robin checked his window every evening, watching for the small slip of paper in cipher that would mean his brother had not abandoned him. The windowsill remained empty. The scar on his arm pulled tight every time he moved it. He wanted to scream at Griffin. He wanted to blame him for the bullet, for the terror, for the lie he'd had to tell Playfair, for the silence that followed. But Griffin had vanished, and Robin had no way to contact him, and the fury had nowhere to go except inward. For the first time since arriving at Oxford, Robin felt truly alone. 3rd year. Griffin did not reappear for the rest of the second term, nor the whole of the third. Robin threw himself into his studies because there was nothing else to do. The third year at Babel was brutal by design. Latin composition, advanced translation theory, comparative etymology, and the beginning of supervised research projects. The faculty assigned each student to a supervisor who would guide their independent work. Ramy was assigned to Professor Schlegel, a German scholar of Sanskrit who had published 3 volumes on Indian philosophy without ever having visited India. Schlegel wanted Ramy to produce a comprehensive catalogue of Indo-Persian poetic forms, with emphasis on their suitability for silver match pairing. Has never even heard a ghazal sung, Ramy said, slamming his books onto the common room table. He thinks the Shiar is just a troubadour with darker skin. I'm supposed to sit there and explain to him that my culture is not his raw material. Victoire's assignment was worse. Professor LeBlanc wanted her to document Haitian Creole folk beliefs, specifically the rituals and invocations associated with voodoo for potential extraction into silver match pairs. For how? He called it primitive but promising, Victoire said, her voice tight. He wants me to dig through the beliefs of my people so he can find a pairing that makes a silver bar glow. At least has interested in your language, Letty said, and immediately froze. The silence that followed was the kind that cracks friendships. Victoire turned to face Letty, her eyes bright with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. Interested, Victoire repeated. That's what you call it. As if my people's sacred practices are a collection of curiosities to be catalogued and exploited. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. Victoire stood, gathering her books. You meant that I should be grateful, that any attention from a French academic is better than the invisibility you suffer as an Englishwoman in a man's institution? But my invisibility is different from yours, Letty. Yours is a glass ceiling. Mine is a glass box with a label on it. She left Letty, stared at the door, her face working through hurt, confusion, and something harder, the defensive pride of someone who had been told she could not understand. I was trying to be supportive, Letty said. Ramy snorted. You were trying to make her problem smaller than yours. That's not fair. Isn't it? The argument that followed was the worst Robin had witnessed between them. Ramy accused Letty of treating their struggles as competition. Letty accused Ramy of punishing her for being English. By the end, neither of them was speaking to the other, and Victoire had stopped coming to the common room altogether. The days grew shorter and colder. The rain fell without ceasing. Robin found himself waking in the middle of the night, his heart racing, his arm aching where the bullet had entered. He checked his window obsessively. The sill remained empty. His third-year practicum placed him under Professor Chakravarti, maintaining and repairing silver bars throughout Oxford's infrastructure. It was unglamorous work replacing worn-out carriage bars, recalibrating street lamp match pairs, fixing the resonance links that kept the Bodleian's climate-controlled archives functioning. But it gave Robin something he hadn't expected: access. Chakravarti showed him the resonance chamber on the 8th floor, a room filled with silver rods inscribed in a cipher alphabet invented in the 17th century. Each rod connected to a specific silver bar somewhere in England, maintaining the magical effect across distance. Without these, Chakravarti said, every silver bar would have to be re-engraved every 6 months. The cost would be astronomical. The empire would grind to a halt. Robin looked at the rods, hundreds of them, humming faintly, warm to the touch. So this is the heart of everything. This is the spine. Chakravarti touched one of the rods with something like reverence. They need us desperately. It's good that they need us. Robin thought of Griffin's theory, the inflection point, the pressure that forces empires to change. He thought of what would happen if someone removed a single rod, or 2, or 20. He said nothing. The disappearance. One morning in late autumn, Professor Playfair called the cohort together with grim news. Anthony Ribbon has been declared missing and presumed dead, he said, his voice flat, as if reciting a weather report. He disappeared during fieldwork in Barbados last summer. Our contacts in the Colonial Office have been unable to locate him. The Institute extends its condolences to those who knew him. The room was silent. Letty's face went white. Victoire looked away, her jaw tight. His position will be filled by Mr. Woodhouse, who has kindly agreed to take over Anthony's teaching responsibilities effective immediately. Letty found her voice. That's it? He's dead and we're just moving on? Mr. Ribbon knew the risks of fieldwork, Playfair said. He served the Institute admirably. We honor his memory by continuing the work. The meeting ended. The students filed out in silence. In the corridor, Letty rounded on Victoire. "Why aren't you angrier? Anthony was our friend. He welcomed us on the first day. He showed us the tower, and they're acting like he was a broken piece of furniture." Victoire's voice was barely a whisper. "Anthony was a slave. What? Babel bought his freedom. When the abolition didn't release him because his owner wouldn't comply, the Institute paid for his manumission. That's why he was here. That's why he served them. He owed them his life." "Then they should mourn him," Letty said. "They should at least pretend to mourn him." Robin thought of Anthony's kind face, his patient explanations, the way he had guided them through the tower on their first day. He thought of the daguerreotype patent, the clever Latin match pair that had made Babel famous, and he thought of the speed with which a man's desk could be cleared and given to someone else. That night, he tried to imagine Anthony's final moments alone in Barbados, cut off from the silver that might have saved him. He couldn't. The images kept sliding into older ones. His mother on the straw mat in Canton, her skin cold, her eyes open. He checked his window. Nothing. The return. Griffin reappeared in December in the same pub on the far side of the Cherwell. He looked worse than Robin had ever seen him, gaunt, limping, a fresh bandage visible beneath his shirt. He ordered 3 plates of food and ate like a man who hadn't seen a meal in weeks. "You were shot," Robin said. "You were shot." Griffin didn't look up from his food. "I heard." "Playfair's new wards, real bullets. You handled it well. You disappeared. I waited for weeks. You never came. The heist succeeded. The silver reached Liverpool before the slave ships. 20 bars redistributed to operatives in 3 ports. That's what matters." Robin's voice rose. "What matters is that I nearly died. What matters is that I sewed up my own arm with a needle and thread because I couldn't go to the infirmary without explaining how I got shot breaking into the tower. What matters is that you vanished and I had no way to contact you, and I thought—" He stopped. The pub was quiet. A few heads had turned. Griffin set down his fork. "You thought what?" "I thought you were dead. I thought the next body dragged out of Babel would be yours." Something flickered across Griffin's face, surprise, or guilt, or maybe just exhaustion. "I had other operations, other cities. I couldn't stay in Oxford. You could have left a note. I couldn't risk it." Griffin's voice hardened. "The security upgrades made communication dangerous. Every message I sent you was a liability. I had to go silent." Robin sat back, the anger draining out of him, leaving only weariness. "Anthony Ribbon is dead. Disappeared in Barbados." "I heard." Griffin's tone was flat. "It doesn't surprise me." "Doesn't surprise you? He was one of us. He was Hermes." Griffin looked away. He knew the risks. The phrase hit Robin like a slap. Knew the risks, the same phrase Playfair had used, the same cold institutional language that made a man's life sound like a business expense. "Sometimes I look at you," Robin said, "and I don't know if you care about anything or anyone. I don't know if this is a revolution or a vendetta. It can be both. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." Griffin stood, pulling coins from his pocket. "There's a safe house on St. Aldates, the church with the rusted gate. If you ever need to find me, leave a message there. Don't come looking for me otherwise." He limped toward the door, his thin coat hanging off his shoulders like a flag of surrender. Robin didn't call him back. The siege. The new year brought escalating violence. Someone painted TONGUESOFSATAN across Babel's white stone walls. Someone else scrawled DEVILSSILVER on the main gate. The students who walked between colleges after dark learned to move in groups, and even then, the attacks came a shove into the gutter, a rock thrown from a shadowed window, a whispered threat in a language that needed no translation. The worst day came in March. A crowd of textile workers, laid off after a new match pair, made their skills obsolete. Gathered outside the tower gates, they carried signs. BREADNOT BARS SILVERSTEALSWORK DEATHTOTHETRANSLATORS. Robin and his friends were walking back from the Bodleian when the crowd spotted them. The shift in the noise was immediate, from generalized anger to focused fury. Someone threw an egg. It arced through the gray air and struck Ramy's shoulder as he stepped in front of Victoire. "Get inside," Ramy said, his voice calm, his body a shield. "Don't run. Don't let them see you're afraid." They walked. The crowd pressed closer, shouting words that Robin had trained himself not to hear. Chink, heathen, foreign filth. He kept his eyes forward and his hands steady and did not let himself think about the weight of the silver bar in his coat pocket. Inside the tower, Professor Lovell was waiting. His face was cold, his posture rigid with contempt. "A regrettable incident," he said. "The mob always resists progress. The Luddites smashed machines. These wretches smash reputations. They'll be dealt with. They're not machines," Victoire said. "They're people. They lost their livelihoods because of what we do here." Lovell looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "Progress requires sacrifice. The weak are always trampled by the strong. That's not cruelty. That's nature." Robin thought of his mother's body on the straw mat. Just any woman, Lovell had called her. The weak, trampled by the strong. Nature. That night, a package arrived at Playfair's office. Inside was a clock wired to an explosive device designed to detonate when the hour hand reached 12. It would have killed everyone on the 8th floor. It rained that evening, the detonator got wet and failed to spark. "What happens," Ramy asked in the common room that night, "when it doesn't rain?" No one had an answer. Expulsion. The examination results arrived in April. 2 students passed with honors, 1 passed with merit, 1 passed with a bare sufficiency. Philip Wright failed, the same Philip Wright who had specialized in French and German at the first-year dinner, who had asked Robin with genuine curiosity about Chinese poetry. He had struggled through 3 years of Babel's punishing curriculum, and, in the end, the examiners found him wanting. The expulsion ceremony took place in the main hall. Playfair called Wright to the front of the assembled faculty. Wright's hands were shaking. He tried to speak, to explain, to plead, to ask for a second chance, but Playfair silenced him with a raised palm. "The Institute has made its decision," Playfair said. "You are no longer a member of this body." He lifted Wright's blood vial from the display case. The glass caught the light, the dark liquid inside glinting like a jewel. Then Playfair snapped the vial in half across the edge of the table. The blood spilled across the wood. Wright collapsed as if a spear had been driven through his abdomen. 2 attendants caught him before he hit the floor and dragged him, limp and sobbing, from the hall. Robin stood frozen. He had known intellectually that severance from Babel was permanent, that the blood binding was not symbolic but literal, a magical contract that could be broken only through pain. But knowing was different from seeing. Seeing was a boy crumpled on the floor, his future vanished, his body rejecting the loss like a severed limb. That night, Robin met Griffin again in the Twisted Root. Griffin's arm was freshly bandaged, a dark stain spreading through the cloth. He ordered ale and drank half of it in one swallow. "I need your help," Griffin said. "We're hitting the Birmingham foundry. They're casting cannon barrels for the Navy, and we're going to destroy the shipment." "With what?" "Explosives. I've been working with a demolitions expert. We have a plan." Robin stared at him. "Explosives. You want to set off explosives in a military foundry. It's the only way. The cannon barrels have silver-reinforced casings. Physical force is the only thing that can breach them. You're going to get yourselves killed." "We might." Griffin's eyes were flat. "That's the nature of the work." "No." Robin set down his glass. "No, it's not. The work was supposed to be redistribution. Stealing silver and putting it in the hands of people who need it. This is terrorism. It's war." Griffin's voice was cold. "I told you this wasn't a game. I told you people would die. You're bleeding through your bandages. You're limping. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Griffin, you're not fighting a war. You're bleeding out while Rome burns in the distance." Griffin's jaw tightened. "Don't quote philosophy at me. You don't know what I've sacrificed." "Then tell me. Tell me what you've sacrificed. Tell me what you've accomplished. Because from where I'm standing, I see a man who's been fighting for years and hasn't changed anything. The empire still stands. Babel still operates. The slave ships still sail. The silver still flows. What have you actually done?" The silence that followed was terrible. Griffin's face went through several changes: fury, then pain, then something that looked almost like shame. Then it hardened into the mask Robin had learned to dread. "You want to know what I've done?" Griffin's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've done things that would make you vomit. I've killed people. I've betrayed people. I've let people die so that the mission could continue. You sit in your warm room with your books and your friends and your little rebellions, and you judge me. You don't know anything, then tell me. No, Griffin, no. Griffin stood, swaying slightly. You made your choice. Stay in the glorarium. Enjoy the warmth. When the knife comes, don't say I didn't warn you. He started toward the door, then paused. His back was to Robin, his shoulders rigid. I know where you sleep, Griffin said quietly. I know who your friends are. If you ever speak of what I've told you, if you ever breathe a word about Hermes to anyone, I will tie up those loose ends. Do you understand? Robin's mouth was dry. You'd kill me. I'd kill everyone. You, Ramy, Victoire, Letty, everyone who might have heard something they shouldn't. The mission is more important than any one life. Including mine, including yours. He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. The pub noise resumed, but Robin couldn't hear it over the pounding of his own heart. We're both stateless, Griffin had said once. Neither of us has a home. Robin had never felt the truth of those words more keenly than he did now. The long silence. Griffin kept his word. No more notes appeared at Robin's window, no more messages in cipher. The birch tree at Merton kept its bark unmarked. For an entire term, Robin heard nothing from Hermes. Force died. At first, he thought the silence was tactical, a cooling-off period before the next assignment. Then, he thought it was punishment. Then, as the weeks passed and the examination season approached, he stopped thinking about it at all, because there was simply no room left in his head. The final examinations at Babel were legendary for their brutality. Written papers, oral defenses, and the practical silver working tests that every fourth-year student dreaded above all else. Robin spent 14 hours a day in the Bodleian, his eyes burning, his stomach churning with the cheap coffee that was all he could afford. Letty developed a nervous tic in her left eyelid. Victoire began seeing patterns in things that weren't there, omens in the arrangement of leaves on a windowsill, warnings in the flight of birds. Ramy flatly refused the silver bars engraved with the match pair for meticulous and metis, fear that other students were using to sharpen their concentration. They make you anxious when you make a mistake, Ramy said. I make enough mistakes without magic punishing me for them. The stress manifested differently in each of them, but it manifested. Robin developed tremors in his hands that made writing difficult. His appetite vanished. Twice during practice examinations, he lost his vision entirely for several seconds, the words on the page dissolving into white static, his brain simply refusing to process any more information. 3 days before the practical test, he walked into a bookshop on Broad Street and saw Anthony Ribbon. Anthony was alive. Anthony was here in Oxford, standing in the poetry section with a book open in his hands. His face was thinner than Robin remembered, and had grown a beard, but it was unmistakably him. Anthony? Anthony looked up. His eyes went wide. Then, before Robin could say another word, he turned and fled through the back door of the shop, vanishing into the alley behind. Robin ran after him, but the alley was empty. No footprints, no sign of passage, as if Anthony had never been there at all. He told the others that evening. Ramy was skeptical. Victoire was silent. Letty suggested had hallucinated from exhaustion, but Robin knew what had seen. Anthony was alive, Anthony was hiding, and Anthony, like Robin, like Ramy, like Victoire, was keeping secrets. The examination, the practical test, took place in the 8th floor workshop. Professor Chakravarti presided, his dark eyes unreadable behind his spectacles. You will engrave a match pair of your own devising onto a fresh bar of silver, he said. The pair must be original, no established patents, nothing from the Institute's registry. You will then activate the bar and demonstrate its effect. You have 1 hour. Robin's bar lay on the table before him. Blank silver, cool to the touch, heavy with potential. His mind had gone entirely still. All the weeks of cramming, all the practice sessions, all the terror they drained away, leaving only the bar and the graver and the word that had come to him in the middle of a sleepless night. Mingbai, Mandarin for understand, but also bright and white, a word that contained within itself the idea of clarity as illumination. He had thought about pairing it with the English comprehend, but the Latin root of comprehendere, to seize, felt wrong. He wanted something gentler, something that captured the sense of light dawning. He chose enlighten, not a perfect match. No match was perfect, but close enough. The gap between them was productive. It was a gap that meant something. He engraved the characters carefully, his hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. Mingbai on one face of the bar and lighten on the other. The silver accepted the graver's bite, the lines clean and precise. When he activated the bar, it glowed, a warm light, golden and soft, that filled the workshop and wrapped around Chakravarti like a blanket. The professor's stern expression flickered, and then, for just a moment, he smiled. Successful, Chakravarti said. The effect is mild but coherent. The match pair is original. You pass. Robin exhaled. The light faded. The bar went cold in his hands. He had done it. The ball, the commemoration ball at University College, was the social event of the Oxford calendar. Tickets cost a fortune. The decorations were obscenely lavish flowers enhanced by a Chinese match pair that made their colors impossibly vivid. Champagne chilled by silver bars that drew cold from the air itself. Acrobats imported from London and dressed in vaguely oriental costumes that made Robin's skin crawl. Letty had insisted they all attend. She had used the memory of her dead brother Lincoln, crushed by a cart 4 years ago, the brother she had wished dead the night before he died, to talk Victoire into a dress. She had bargained and pleaded and bullied until Ramy agreed to work as a server, trading labor for entry. Robin and Ramy spent the first hour of the ball carrying trays of champagne through the crowd, invisible in their servants' uniforms, while the wealthy students laughed and danced and pretended not to see them. Victoire and Letty arrived together, transformed by their gowns into creatures Robin barely recognized. Letty looked luminous, her pale skin set off by a deep blue dress that matched her eyes. Victoire looked magnificent, her dark skin glowing against the gold fabric Letty had persuaded her to wear, her natural reserve softening into something like pleasure. It lasted about an hour. Colin Thornhill, drunk and stumbling, collided with Victoire near the refreshment table. He blinked at her, his eyes struggling to focus.